Life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. After spending 6 years in a relationship that nearly broke me, I thought I had finally found my way back to myself. Those years left scars, both visible and invisible, that I'm still learning to live with. My ex-partner's manipulation and control had chipped away at everything I was, leaving behind a shell of my former self. The journey back wasn't easy. Week after week, I sat in my therapist's office, trying to piece together the fragments of who I used to be. She helped me understand that none of it was my fault, that I deserved better. The diagnosis of PTSD didn't surprise me, but it made the road ahead seem even longer. Nightmares, flashbacks, and anxiety became unwelcome companions on my path to healing. But slowly, through countless therapy sessions and endless hours of self-work, I started to rebuild. I learned to trust my instincts again, to set boundaries, to believe that I deserved respect and kindness. It took years, but eventually I reached a point where the idea of dating didn't feel like stepping off a cliff. That's when I met him. He was different from anyone I'd known, patient, kind, and genuinely interested in understanding me. When I nervously shared my past with him, he didn't run away or dismiss my experiences. Instead, he listened, acknowledged my struggles, and promised to support me through them. Our early days were filled with careful conversations about boundaries and comfort zones. I appreciated how he always checked in with me, making sure I felt safe and heard. We'd spend evenings talking for hours, sharing stories and building trust. There were moments when my anxiety would spike, and he'd simply hold my hand, letting me work through it at my own pace. I remember one weekend we spent at a mountain cabin. The entire trip showed me what respect looked like in action. He constantly asked about my comfort level, whether I wanted my own space, and never pushed for more than I was ready to give. When I had a PTSD episode during our stay, he sat with me quietly, his presence a steady anchor as I weathered the storm of memories and emotions. For the first time in years, I felt hope blooming in my chest. Here was someone who seemed to understand the importance of boundaries, who made me feel seen and valued. We had open discussions about everything, including intimate topics, and he always emphasized the importance of clear communication and consent. I started to let my guard down, believing that maybe this time would be different. Maybe I had finally found someone who would treat my heart with the gentleness it needed after being shattered for so long. Each day with him felt like another step away from my painful past toward a future I could actually look forward to. But life has a cruel way of testing your strength just when you think you've found solid ground. I didn't know then that my newfound sense of security was about to be challenged in a way that would force me to confront my deepest fears and strongest convictions. The trust I had carefully built, like a house of cards, was about to face a storm that would test its foundations. One evening, we had an important conversation about boundaries and intimacy. We were sitting on my couch, the soft lamplight making everything feel safe and warm. He brought up that he wanted to explore new things with me, specifically mentioning certain intimate acts he hadn't tried before. I appreciated his honesty and shared my own experiences, explaining that while I was open to exploring, some things needed proper preparation, communication, and the right mood. We couldn't just dive in without discussing it first. He seemed to understand completely. His response was everything I needed to hear, acknowledging the importance of consent, preparation, and mutual comfort. That conversation made me feel even more secure in our relationship. Here was someone who truly got it, who respected my needs and boundaries. As weeks passed, his consistent respect for my limits only strengthened my trust. When we were intimate, he always checked in with me, making sure I was comfortable. If certain touches reminded me of my past trauma, I could tell him, and he'd immediately adjust without making me feel guilty or difficult. This was so different from my previous relationship, where my comfort never seemed to matter. But everything changed one night. What started as consensual intimacy suddenly shifted without warning. He tried something we had explicitly discussed needing preparation and communication for. The pain and shock froze me in place. My body tensed up, and I tried to push him away, but he didn't stop. I felt tears forming in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I did what I had learned to do during my abusive relationship. I disconnected from my body, watching everything happen from somewhere far away. When it was over, he noticed how quiet I'd become and asked why I wasn't making any noise, as if he had no idea what he'd just done. I couldn't find my voice. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on my chest, crushing any words I might have said. I turned away from him, curling into myself like I used to do years ago. He got up, used the bathroom, came back, and kissed my forehead as if nothing was wrong. "Let's get some sleep," he said, turning off the light and leaving me alone in the darkness with my thoughts. The next few days passed in a blur. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived that moment. The pain, the betrayal, the complete disregard for everything we had discussed. I couldn't focus on anything else. My mind kept spinning with questions. Had I not been clear enough? Should I have fought harder? Was I overreacting? These thoughts were painfully familiar, echoing the same self-doubt I'd experienced in my abusive relationship. I reached out to my therapist, barely holding back tears as I told her what happened. She reminded me firmly that consent is non-negotiable, and what he did was a clear violation of my boundaries. My best friend was even more direct, her anger matching the rage I couldn't quite let myself feel yet. She insisted this wasn't my fault and urged me to stand up for myself. But confronting him felt overwhelming. The thought of hearing him deny it or try to blame me made my stomach turn. I knew from experience how quickly abusers could twist situations, making victims doubt their own memories and feelings. The weight of this decision, whether to confront him or just walk away, felt like it was crushing me. After days of internal struggle, I finally gathered the courage to end things. I couldn't keep seeing him, not after what happened. The trust was broken, and no amount of explanations could fix it. I sent him a text, keeping it simple and clear. I told him I couldn't continue our relationship because he had violated my boundaries. His response came quickly, full of apologies and excuses. He claimed he didn't realize I wouldn't want it, that he thought we were close enough that I would have said no if I needed to. Each message made me feel sicker. His final text before I blocked him was the worst. "I'm sorry I messed up. Haven't you ever made a mistake and deeply regretted it? It was my first time, and I got carried away." Reading those words, I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was a conscious choice to ignore everything we had discussed. His messages showed me he would never truly understand or take responsibility for what he did. It was the same pattern I'd seen before. Minimize, excuse, blame. The aftermath was hard. I found myself falling back into old patterns of self-blame and doubt. Years of abuse had taught me to question myself, to wonder if maybe I was the problem. My ex used to twist everything around until I couldn't trust my own memories or feelings. He'd convince me that if he hurt me, it was because I deserved it somehow. But this time was different. Through all the confusion and pain, I held on to what I'd learned in therapy. I reminded myself that my boundaries were valid, that consent matters, that I had communicated clearly and he had chosen to ignore it. This wasn't about me not being clear enough or not fighting hard enough. It was about his decision to violate my trust. My support system helped me stay strong. In group therapy, other survivors shared similar stories, reminding me I wasn't alone. My best friend checked on me daily, letting me cry when I needed to, and reminding me of my strength when I forgot. My therapist helped me process the anger and betrayal without letting it consume me. Looking back now, I can see how this experience, as painful as it was, showed me how far I've come. Years ago, I might have accepted his excuses, might have blamed myself, might have stayed. But now I know better. I know that my boundaries matter, that my consent is non-negotiable, that I deserve someone who respects both. The healing process isn't linear. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There are still days when the memories creep in, when the doubt tries to take hold. But I'm stronger now. Each time I stand up for myself, each time I honor my boundaries, I rebuild a little more of what was broken. I don't know when I'll be ready to date again. Right now, I'm focusing on taking care of myself, on strengthening the boundaries I've built, on remembering that I'm worth more than what either of them made me feel. My therapist says healing is a journey, not a destination. And while this latest chapter was painful, it taught me something valuable, that I can trust myself, even when others prove untrustworthy. my story isn't over. There are still hard days, moments when the past feels too heavy to carry. But I'm not carrying it alone anymore. I have people in my corner now, people who remind me of my worth when I forget. And most importantly, I have myself, stronger, wiser, and finally learning to trust my own voice again. Maybe that's what healing really looks like, not the absence of pain or fear, but the presence of strength and self-trust despite them. Every time I choose myself, choose my boundaries, choose my healing, I'm writing a new chapter in my story, and this time I'm the one holding the pen.